There is a moment, usually somewhere around the third or fourth time you walk past it in a parking lot, when the Escalade stops being a car and starts being a statement, not the kind of statement that needs explaining. The kind that simply exists and makes everything around it feel slightly smaller, slightly quieter, slightly less certain of itself. Most vehicles earn your attention once. The 2026 Cadillac Escalade earns it every single time. But here's the thing nobody tells you about that feeling. It has nothing to do with size. America has always had a complicated relationship with luxury. For most of the 20th century, this country built the finest automobiles on earth. Cadillac was not just a brand, it was the standard, the literal industry standard. When engineers in Stuttgart and Coventry wanted a benchmark, they measured against Detroit. That era faded. The Europeans refined their way into dominance, and for a long time, the conversation about true luxury moved across the Atlantic and stayed there. Range Rover owned the road presence conversation. Mercedes owned the interior conversation. Bentley owned the aspiration conversation. And Cadillac, for a stretch of years that nobody inside General Motors likes to discuss, owned very little except nostalgia and square footage. The Escalade survived that period on presence alone, on the sheer, almost irrational confidence of its proportions. People bought it because nothing else made the same entrance. But surviving on presence is not the same as deserving it. And for years, the critics were not entirely wrong. The interior lagged. The technology felt reactive rather than visionary. The ride was big truck honest in ways that occasionally reminded you of its origins. It was magnificent in the way a great American diner is magnificent. Generous, familiar, slightly rough around the edges, and completely unbothered by your opinion of it. The 2026 model is something different. And this is where the story becomes impossible to ignore. What Cadillac has done with this generation is not an evolution in the traditional sense. It is closer to a reckoning, a decision made somewhere in the upper floors of a design studio in Warren, Michigan, that this vehicle was no longer going to compete by European standards. It was going to redefine what the standards should have been all along. That is either an act of genuine creative confidence or an extraordinarily well-executed piece of self-belief. Possibly both. The result is a vehicle that does not feel like it is trying to be anything other than exactly what it is, and that quality in the luxury space is rarer than most manufacturers will admit. Walk up to the 2026 Escalade, and the first thing you register is the light. The illuminated Cadillac crest, the full-width LED lighting signature at both ends, the way the exterior surfaces catch and redirect what is around them. There is a sculptural precision to this generation that the previous models gestured at but never fully delivered. The lines are tighter, the stance is more purposeful. It is still unmistakably large, but the mass feels considered now rather than simply accumulated. Cadillac's designers made a deliberate choice to sharpen every surface without losing any of the commanding road presence that defines the nameplate. That balance is harder to achieve than it looks. Then you open the door. The interior of the 2026 Escalade is where the argument against American luxury quietly runs out of things to say. The curved old display system that debuted in earlier generations has been refined and expanded into something that no longer feels like a feature. It feels like an environment. 38 inches of screen real estate, curved to follow the natural arc of the dashboard, rendering with a sharpness and color accuracy that makes the interiors of several European competitors look like they were designed in a previous decade, which in fairness, some of them were. But the screens are not the story. They are the punctuation. The real story is the materials. Semi-aniline, leather across surfaces that other manufacturers would have filled with plastic or faux material composites. Open-pore wood trim that responds differently to morning light than to evening light. Because real wood does that, and real wood is what this is, the attention to tactile detail in the 2026 Escalade reflects a philosophy shift that goes deeper than a product cycle. Cadillac is no longer asking whether American luxury belongs in the same conversation as European luxury. They built an interior that simply starts the conversation from a different place entirely. The seating is where this becomes personal. The available massaging seats with active cooling and heating operate through a system that adjusts to the temperature of the cabin rather than running on a fixed program. On a long drive, this distinction matters more than any specification sheet can communicate. Second-row passengers in the extended wheelbase variant have more legroom than the rear cabin of a standard wheelbase, Mercedes GLS. The third row. Historically, the concession that proved the Escalade was a truck pretending to be a luxury vehicle has been reimagined with dedicated climate controls and enough headroom to seat adults without negotiation. The 2026 Escalade offers 3 powertrain options, and the one that reframes the entire vehicle is not the one you might expect. The 6.2-liter V8 remains, and it remains exceptional, 420 horsepower, a sound that European turbocharged engines have spent years trying to synthesize and cannot quite replicate, and an effortlessness at highway speeds that reminds you why displacement still matters. The turbocharged 3.0-liter diesel continues to be the range of choice for those who prioritize real-world touring range over everything else. Impressive fuel economy figures for a vehicle of this size and presence, but the powertrain that changes the conversation is the Super Cruise equipped variant paired to a refined version of Cadillac's adaptive air suspension. Super Cruise, for those who have not experienced it, is not a driver assistance system in the way that phrase is usually understood. It is a genuine hands-free highway driving system that operates across more than 400,000 mapped miles of divided highway in North America. It does not ask you to keep your hands hovering above the wheel as a reassurance gesture. It does not pulse the steering to remind you it is only partially in control. It takes control completely on qualified roads, and it does so with a confidence and smoothness that makes competitors' systems feel like they are still in beta. Paired to the air suspension, which reads the road surface and adjusts damping rates in real time. The highway driving experience in the 2026 Escalade is one that requires recalibration. You cover ground without sensing that you are covering it. The noise, isolation, triple-sealed doors, and acoustic glass throughout reduces cabin intrusion to levels that make conversation feel different, quieter, more deliberate, the kind of quiet that costs money to engineer. None of this exists in isolation from the question that has always followed this vehicle. Is it actually luxurious, or is it simply large? For a long time, that question had a complicated answer. The 2026 model closes that gap in a way no previous generation managed. The combination of material quality, technology integration, ride sophistication, and design coherence creates an interior experience that is not competing with a Range Rover Sport or a BMW X7 on their terms. It is operating on its own terms, with its own logic, and that logic holds up. There is a version of this story where the Escalade's success is primarily a cultural phenomenon, where the name alone, the badge, the proportions, carry the weight and the substance is secondary. That version of the story was more defensible 5 years ago. With this generation, the substance has arrived to match the mythology. And that changes what the Escalade represents, not just for Cadillac, but for American luxury as a category. Because for decades, the underlying assumption in the global luxury automotive market has been that refinement is European by nature, that the attention to detail, the engineering philosophy, the willingness to prioritize experience over specification, those qualities belong to a tradition that runs through Bavaria and the English Midlands and the outskirts of Stuttgart. The 2026 Cadillac Escalade does not make that argument irrelevant. History does not work that cleanly, but it complicates the argument in ways that are difficult to dismiss. The technology suite is extensive without being performative. The augmented reality navigation overlay projects directional guidance directly onto the live camera feed of the road ahead, eliminating the translation step between screen information and real-world action that conventional navigation requires. The AKG Studio Reference audio system, 19 speakers, tuned specifically for the acoustic properties of this cabin, reproduces music with a spatial accuracy that makes the listening experience feel different from anything available in this vehicle's immediate competitive set. Not louder. More present, more real. There is a detail in the way the 2026 Escalade handles ambient lighting that captures something important about what Cadillac has chosen to prioritize. The system offers 36 color options, which is not unusual at this price point. What is unusual is the way those colors were selected. Each one was calibrated against the interior materials under different lighting conditions to ensure that the ambient light enhances rather than fights the natural tones of the leather and trim. It is the kind of decision that the customer will never consciously notice,